I was folding towels in the linen closet when I heard my name through the wall. Not once, twice. Two women were laughing about a plan that would destroy my mother's job, my future, and a man's entire heart, and they didn't know I was standing right there, listening to every word. If you've ever overheard something that changed everything, stay with me till the end, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because what happens next will stay with you long after this video ends. My name is Odalys, and before that night, my life was simple in the best way a life can be. I was 24 years old, living in a small apartment with my mother, Bettina, a woman who had spent 15 years of her life keeping the halls of the Ashworth estate spotless, keeping other people's homes warm while ours stayed quiet and small. I didn't grow up with much, but I grew up with enough. Enough love, enough warmth, enough late-night lessons from my mother about dignity, about working hard even when no one was watching. Every morning, I woke up before the sun to catch the bus, my nursing textbooks tucked under my arm, my mind already tired before the day had even begun. I was studying to become a nurse, chasing a future that felt far away but not impossible. And in between classes, I would stop by the estate to bring my mother lunch, to help her carry linens, to feel closer to her in the only hours we had together. That's how I first came to know Griffin Ashworth, not as the billionaire the world talked about, but as a quiet, careful man who remembered my mother's birthday every single year, who spoke to the staff like they were people, not shadows. I told myself it was nothing, just respect, just admiration for a man who didn't have to be kind, but chose to be anyway. I never let myself think beyond that. My mother used to say our world and his world were built from different soil, and I believed her. I had my books, my dreams, my small apartment with the leaking faucet, and that was enough. I didn't need more than that. Looking back now, I wonder if some part of me already sensed that everything was about to change, that the quiet, ordinary rhythm of our lives was only the calm settling in before something broke it wide open. But that evening, folding towels in a linen closet I had folded towels in 100 times before, I had no idea that the walls around me were about to carry words that would shatter my heart and change the course of all our lives forever. The night everything started to shift was the night Griffin announced his engagement. The estate was dressed like something out of a dream. Golden lights strung between the trees, music drifting through the air, laughter that felt too polished to be real. My mother and I were working, weaving through the crowd with trays and quiet efficiency, invisible in the way staff often are at parties like that. And that was the first night I truly saw Celine. She was beautiful, I won't pretend otherwise. She moved through the crowd like she belonged in every room she entered, but I noticed something the moment the cameras weren't on her, a coldness that flickered across her face when she thought no one important was watching. She snapped at one of the servers for a spilled drop of wine. She looked through my mother like she was furniture, and then seconds later, she turned back to Griffin with a smile so warm it almost made me doubt what I'd just seen. Almost. At one point, I stepped outside for air near the parking area, and I saw her there, standing too close to a man I didn't recognize, their conversation hushed, tense, urgent in a way that didn't belong at an engagement party. She pulled away quickly when a car passed, smoothing her dress like nothing had happened. I told myself maybe it was nothing, maybe I was imagining things, but my chest didn't believe that, even if my mind tried to. Later that night, when we were finally home and my feet ached from hours of standing, my mother sat beside me and said something I'll never forget. Some people wear kindness like perfume, Odalys. It fades the second they think no one's smelling it anymore. I didn't fully understand how right she was. Not yet. I told myself it wasn't my place to question any of it. Griffin was happy, or at least he seemed to be, and happiness wasn't something I had any right to interfere with. But that unsettled feeling stayed with me, quiet and persistent, like a splinter I couldn't quite reach. I didn't know yet that in just a few days, I would be standing in a closet not much bigger than a hallway, and every doubt I'd tried to bury would come rushing back at once, undeniable and impossible to unhear. The linen closet near the terrace was small, tucked away, the kind of place no one thinks to look for another human being. I was in there folding towels, the same task I'd done 100 times before, when I heard the door creak open and two familiar voices spill inside. I recognized them instantly, Solene and her friend Priya. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Something in me just knew I needed to stay still. At first, it was just laughter, light and careless. Then Solene said something that made my whole body go cold. She said she never loved Griffin, not once. She called the marriage a transaction, a name attached to a fortune, nothing more. Priya laughed nervously, asked if she was really going to go through with it, and Solene said of course she was. Why wouldn't she, when it came with everything she'd ever wanted? Then came the part that broke something deeper in me. She mentioned him, the man from the parking lot. She said she had no intention of giving him up after the wedding, that Griffin would never have to know, that men like him were too trusting to ever suspect anything. Priya's voice grew tense, warning her to be careful, but Solene just laughed again, confident, untouchable. And then she said my mother's name. She said once the wedding was over, she'd find a reason to get rid of Bettina, said something about not wanting the help gossiping about her past, about needing people around her who knew how to stay quiet and know their place. She said it so easily, like my mother's 15 years of loyalty meant nothing at all. My hands were shaking so hard, I nearly dropped the glass I was holding. My heart was pounding so loud, I was terrified they'd hear it through the wall. It wasn't just anger rising in my chest, it was heartbreak, sharp and sudden, for a man who didn't know the truth, and fear, cold and immediate, for my mother's future hanging in the balance of a lie. I stood frozen long after their voices faded down the hallway, staring at nothing, replaying every word until it carved itself into memory. And just as I thought the worst of it was over, I heard footsteps approaching the closet door again, slow, deliberate, and I realized with a sinking heart that I wasn't the only one who had heard everything. The footsteps outside the closet belonged to Emeka, Griffin's assistant, a man who had worked beside him for years and never once raised his voice out of place. When I opened the door and saw his face, I knew he had heard enough to believe me. He didn't ask me to repeat everything. He just asked if I was certain. I told him every word was burned into my memory, and I would never be able to forget it even if I tried. That night, I told my mother everything. Her hands trembled around her cup of tea, fear settling into her eyes before anything else. She whispered that we couldn't afford for me to be wrong, that speaking up could cost her the only job she'd known for 15 years. But I told her some things mattered more than safety. Some silences cost more than the risk of speaking. Emeka helped arrange a moment where the truth couldn't be denied or twisted, a quiet gathering of the people who needed to hear it, Griffin among them. When the moment came, Solene stood there in her expensive dress, smiling like she always did, until Griffin asked her plainly if she had ever loved him. Her hesitation lasted only a second, but it was enough. Priya, guilt written across her face, finally broke and confirmed everything I had heard in that closet. Solene's expression shattered. She turned on me immediately, her voice rising into a shout, calling me a liar, a jealous girl trying to steal a life that was never mine to want. The room went silent around us. And then, before anyone could stop her, she slapped me, hard, sudden, humiliating, the sound of it cracking through the air louder than anything she had said all night. I stood there stunned, my cheek burning, my eyes stinging with tears I refused to let fall in front of her. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Griffin stepped forward, his voice low and steady, telling her that was enough. I saw something shift in his eyes as he looked at me. Not pity, but recognition, like he was seeing me clearly for the very first time, not as the maid's daughter, but as the only person in that room who had told him the truth when it would have been so much easier to stay silent. Griffin didn't shout. He didn't throw a single accusation across the room, even though every person there would have understood if he had. He simply looked at Solene, calm in a way that felt heavier than any anger could ever have been, and told her the engagement was over. No dramatics, no bargaining, just quiet, absolute finality. Somehow, that stillness broke her more than shouting ever could have. I watched her realize in real time that all her confidence had nothing left to stand on. Word spread fast, the way it always does in circles built on appearances. Solene's family, so proud and particular about reputation, distanced themselves from her almost overnight, embarrassed by a scandal they couldn't control. The man she'd been secretly seeing, the one from the parking lot, disappeared just as quickly once he understood there was no fortune left to attach himself to. Everything she had built, every relationship she had used as a stepping stone, crumbled the moment it stopped serving her. I won't pretend I felt nothing watching it happen. There was a strange ache in my chest, even seeing someone who had hurt so many people lose everything. But mostly, I felt something settle inside me, a quiet understanding that truth, once spoken, has a way of rearranging everything around it, whether we intend it to or not. My mother didn't lose her job. In fact, Griffin called her into his office personally, something he'd never done before, and thanked her, not just for her years of loyalty, but for raising a daughter brave enough to speak the truth when it would have been easier to disappear into silence. He promoted her not long after, and I watched 15 years of quiet, unnoticed work finally receive the recognition it always deserved. As for me, Griffin sought me out privately, away from the noise and the whispers still circling the estate. He didn't say anything grand or rehearsed, he simply thanked me, his eyes still carrying the weight of everything he'd learned that week, and told me he was sorry I had to carry the truth alone for even a moment. There was nothing romantic in that conversation, not yet, just two people standing in the wreckage of someone else's lies, seeing each other honestly for the first time. I went home that night with my cheek still faintly sore, but my heart, for the first time in days, finally felt light. In the weeks that followed, life at the estate slowly found a new rhythm, quieter than before, but somehow steadier, like a house settling after a storm has finally passed. I still came by to help my mother, still folded towels in that same small closet from time to time, though now the memory of what happened there felt less like a wound and more like the place where everything honest in my life had finally been allowed to surface. Griffin and I didn't rush into anything. There were no grand declarations, no sudden shift into a fairy tale I never expected to be part of. Instead, there were small moments, a conversation that lasted longer than it needed to, a quiet dinner where he asked about my nursing studies like they genuinely mattered to him, a comfort that grew slowly instead of arriving all at once. For the first time, I wasn't the maid's daughter standing in the background of his world. I was simply Odalys, someone he trusted, someone he had chosen to see clearly. My mother watched all of it with a look I'd never seen on her before, somewhere between pride and quiet disbelief, as if she still couldn't fully accept that honesty had actually been rewarded instead of punished. I understood that feeling more than I could ever explain. We had spent so long believing that staying quiet was the safer choice, the smarter choice, only to learn that silence would have cost us so much more than the truth ever did. Standing in that linen closet one final time, folding towels out of habit more than necessity, I found myself thinking about everything that had led me there. I learned that truth always finds its way out, even through the thinnest walls, even when we try to bury it out of fear. I learned that kindness is never wasted, that lies always crumble under their own weight eventually, no matter how carefully they're constructed. And I learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak up, even when your voice is shaking, even when everything in you wants to stay silent instead. If this story moved you the way it moved me to live it, don't scroll past without sharing it with someone who needs the reminder that karma always finds its way back around. Like this video, subscribe, and stay close, because next week, another story will break your heart wide open all over again.